Great to be with you again today. We're going to be looking at the first meta position someone should take after we did a little survey of some of the categories of skepticism when it comes to the Bible and challenges to the Bible. And again, this is a series to get someone somewhere in between a committed, mature Christian and somebody who's going to seminary. This isn't a seminary level investigation. This isn't even advanced apologetics or philosophy. It's more trying to bring some of the best and brightest scholarship to you in your anticipation of some of the challenges coming that I would say are more just echoed and magnified challenges to someone treating the Bible with a level of authority in their life that makes someone maybe uncomfortable. These are, again, mostly online challenges that get magnified into these. This should be enough to make any reasonable person drop the Bible. They're not. They're not challenges that are very sophisticated or challenges that are seen to be so valid that it makes people that were previously unaware of these things but informed prone to dismissing the Bible as a key central text existentially and spiritually and morally from a standpoint of virtue and ethics at all. So we're going to get into our first round, kind of what a base run would look like in defending the Bible and keeping the conversation going with somebody and dealing with what we would call type A, B, and C objections. An A objection has to do with things that are just strange about the Bible, again, intended to embarrass the person in their Bible study. Level B is just the supernatural. This is again to make the Bible look kind of superstitious and funny. Any text that includes the supernatural, the end game for somebody running it that way, their critique of Bible that way, especially online, is to get the Bible to look cartoonish and silly and make someone embarrassed to treat it seriously. And then third is just what appear to be morally reprehensible parts of the Bible, i.e. the biggest one today is slavery, and some of the cultural analyses and descriptions going on in the Bible as well, descriptions of the time frame and the time period. And this is a particularly poignant time because we have a significant amount of the American populace that's maleducated with regard to history. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that trail, but let's start today and look at the first meta position when it comes to Christians and the Bible. This is the fact that we live in oh my God, I'm going to start over again. Because I didn't get this thing ready to go. God almighty, get your act together, Joe. Okay, well, let's start again. Hands up and then hands down. Just X all the part before. Golly bum, we got to get this thing where I don't have to edit like this. 3, 2, 1. Hands up, hands down. Well, hello. Welcome back. We're starting session 3 in our defense of the Bible. Again, this is not to be considered some sort of college level or seminary level defense of the Word of God or the using the Bible or being loyal to the Bible as a book that you find to be existentially, morally, and spiritually authoritative and engaging. But this is to handle, before we get to the positive reasons to think the Bible is something more than just a generally inspired, in the sense of artistically inspired, but a divine piece of literature. We're going to go over some of the ways you can anticipate and get ahead of what I would call simpler objections that are magnified online and made to appear to be stronger than they actually are. They're rather simple challenges to the Bible and unsophisticated, minimally. That get a veneer of sophistication with people online are bolstered by the confidence of the personality that's expressing these things. We went over last time some basic categories of understanding across the spectrum when it comes to the Word of God. And we're going to be dealing with kind of what we would call, we're going to use a baseball analogy, a base hit to keep the conversation going with a Bible skeptic that might be prone to using these internet arguments as kind of a battering ram against the Christian. We said there are three basic types. There are three basic types of Bible criticism, but there's three basic types of internet criticism, the more unsophisticated criticism that get illegitimately inflated online and broadcast online, given a megaphone, as it were, metaphorically. And that would be category A objections, which have to do with the sheer strangeness of an ancient document and of the Bible. Some things that we may lack understanding on. And this is intended to embarrass the person by bringing up obscure passages of which they're not familiar and have not been preached upon in years, maybe ever, and then to show them they don't really know the Bible like they should and don't apply it. By the way, over all these objections, there's the consistency argument we're going to talk about. The consistency argument is basically you don't follow everything in the Bible, so quit trying to selectively apply things here and there. We'll talk about that, not necessarily today, but in future sessions. Objection B, we said, was under the idea of trying to present the Bible as mythology, or kind of silly because it has supernatural elements in it, where you dismiss the supernatural and place the Bible firmly in the mythological category to try to make some sort of crude comparison to more modern, or even not so modern fables like Aesop's fables, Avengers as a piece of modern myth-making fiction that's particularly powerful because of the advance in technology and made special effects really almost indiscernible from real things happening in the world to the human eye. And then again, that's to make the Bible look silly and stupid and embarrass you away from any fidelity or loyalty. And last would be what would be considered morally objectionable parts of the Bible. That would be a level C objection. And it's there are certain things in the Bible, because it is an account of an ancient interaction between a people group and other people groups, and it's grounded in history. These things happen in space-time, so there are things in the ancient world that not only have sheer strangeness to them, can be taken and you can run with them to act like the Bible is morally reprehensible, so it shouldn't be a moral guidebook or a spiritual guide for you at all. And so that's, again, where you cherry-pick certain passages, bring them to the fore, and say this is a morally objectionable descriptor of what happened, an expression of what happened, or a record of what happened. And, all the way from they shouldn't have said this, all the way to why did God allow this? So again, it kind of connects to the problem of evil and suffering. But today we're going to say this is like a base hit, to keep the baseball analogy going. This is a base hit. What we're going to talk about today is sort of preliminary discussion points you can bring up to somebody who has a skepticism about the Bible that's probably birthed in an online environment, or have been familiar with some online objections to the Bible, and now it's worked. They're either embarrassed, keep it quiet, or don't want to talk about it anymore. So let's get into this and look at it. The first meta position, a base hit when it comes to response for Christians when the Bible's challenged, is this. Remind them that part of the biblical data is that we live in a fallen world and that we are finite human beings, and we're dealing with an omniscient God, a God who knows all true propositions and might even have access to non-propositional knowledge as well. Again, we're not going to get into the ins and outs of omniscience and the omniscience paradox. We could, but we're not going to do that today. It's not our purpose today. But why is this something to bring up in a conversation? Because part of the data of the Bible is to make a description of human beings that says we have always been limited, but now we're more significantly limited than we were before. We are out of direct relationship with God. We no longer are in Eden. It's no longer in an Edenic setting. So we have what we call partial or impaired faculties. That means our faculties of thought, understanding, comprehension. We no longer have likely what we had prior to the fall, and we just, in comparison to God, don't have the same perspective or purposes many times. We're at cross purposes with him. So what that means is we have to expect, if we take this book seriously, that there will be disagreement and not all the time, but confusion and incomprehension at certain points. Not all the time, but at certain points. And we have to assume there's going to be offensive elements. Why? Because we're dealing with a perfectly good God and a perfectly imperfect, an imperfect human expression. So one way to start this is to go, well, okay, somebody says they have challenge A or B about the Bible. We'll table that for now, the specifics of it. We'll get to it. But right now you need to know that one of the affirmations the Bible says that seems to be writ large in human history is that we are fallen. We have a pathological self-centeredness, a bent towards selfishness in us. And if that's the case, the Bible also says that means that will impair your ability to understand, to see, to comprehend. We get this all in the wisdom literature of the Hebrews as well. We get it in the New Testament as well. And that means you have to cede to the Bible the fact that you are not going to understand it the way you should understand it given your limited fallen perspective. Now, again, that isn't stacking the deck in favor of, you can get by any problem with the Bible by saying that, but this is where we need to start. That, of course, there's going to be things that either look immoral to you, offensive to you. You're a fallen, limited human being. Of course it does. So in God's revelation to humans, doling out that revelation, there's going to be things that occasionally, again, it isn't a stacked deck argument. It's just saying occasionally there's going to be times where you should expect there to be a lack of understanding, a confusion, even a disagreement, or an assumption of what you would consider to be offensive elements given our limitedness, our finitude, and our fallenness as well, because the Bible assumes both of those things about humans. Again, look at the difference between a child's understanding of a parent and notice something, again, that's so observed in human nature that it hardly needs defending. And that would be where the child moves to when they don't get what they want. They immediately try to manipulate the parent by saying there's something wrong in the parent. Now, sometimes they're right. It is something wrong in the parent. But notice how even illegitimately children move to this. I want the bike. Here are some reasons why you can't get the bike right now if the parent decides to furnish the child with reasons. And then you don't love me. So, or you're not, this isn't the way I'd do it if I was the parent, which they don't say that normally, but that's what their statements tend to assume, the philosophy or the ideas behind it. So again, the key here is when it comes to the Bible and problems in it, the issue is more likely ours and not God and in his message. And that's, again, another way, if you want to put it another way, is to say, well, you're going to give the benefit of the doubt to the message from God, especially given all the good things it's produced in human history. We'll get to that on the last third of this presentation, the positive reasons to believe this is divine literature rather than just, how do skeptics put it, an account of Bronze Age nomadic people and steeped in their ignorance that's just pumped up by human beings. So again, first place to start here in our meta position. Now again, this doesn't directly address type A objections with regard to anachronisms and strangeness of the ancient documentation. Type B with the mythology and the supernatural, or type C would appear to be immoral passages that make the Bible difficult to take seriously as a moral document. And again, it doesn't directly deal with the inconsistency argument. We'll get to those. Let's look at a second thing for a base hit, as it were, here, and it's this. We serve a God that gave us a cross-cultural, trans-temporal Bible, and he's giving us in that truths that are now unchanging or set. Now, that doesn't mean every one of them are. We think about the difference between Old Covenant and New Covenant. We think about things that have been fulfilled versus things that are still in effect. But if God's going to deign to give you a revelation of him, you're like, why in a book? We can talk about that too. I can't think of a better way to provide a space for human beings to avoid God if they want, so that love's a possibility. You have to be able to say no or turn away if love's going to be authentic. At least it seems that way in our human love relationships. Sorry, Calvinist. But God has given a cross-cultural, trans-temporal Bible. That means the Bible is going to be given to all various cultures of the world through all time periods. So what conclusion are we to draw from that? That means, by definition, there will be things in the Bible that affirm where your culture happens to be morally right now, and will challenge where your culture happens to be right now. Over and over again, that's what it means to have a Bible that's relevant cross time, cultures, and periods, though situated in a certain esteemed, likely from the divine, esteemed time period to begin with. And again, this isn't difficult. If you're like, why couldn't he give me a more modern? Okay, well, again, there are a lot of things that needed to obtain to have something like our Bible and to get it to us in this way. But there is a there's a certain appreciation someone would have to have for for the idea that God gave us this sort of thing, and we all have this idea that there are certain truths that last the test of time that are worth looking at and moving into our long-term memory. We call this wisdom of the ages. If you're not a believer, we tend to do this all the time. What's worked through the past? How can we learn from the past so we don't make the same mistakes in the future? So again, ancient wisdom for contemporary problems, ancient solutions for contemporary issues is the whole point. The whole idea of the Bible is looking back to pull forward and move forward. Not that the newer is the truer, the latest is the greatest. That's a recipe for disaster, regardless of whether you're a church or a business or anything for that matter. But I don't know. I don't know if that's the case with other ways of contribution. Well, just again, that's a pretty strong conviction of mine. Don't have time to defend it in every point, but again, those that don't learn from history are either doomed to repeat it or remain forever children, if you're quoting Cicero. So again, that means the Bible will both agree and disagree with us individually and our culture collectively at times, and it will agree as well. So disagree and agree. So that again, so when it comes to Bible problems, before you get into the specifics and the nitty-gritty and addressing meta issues or even families of arguments in those A, B, and C challenge categories, you should expect to have both agreement and what we would call variance. Again, I'm not going to say necessarily disagreement, like the Bible's never going to sound the way I want it to sound as a 21st century person. Well, no, variance is the idea that there's going to be, you have to cede the Bible the ability to challenge you. Not only because of the nature of the revelation God chose to give us, for better or for worse. Worse in the sense of when you want to know more about him, it's just not represented as well as I want. Think about the data on heaven. I think there's good logical and theological reasons why it's underrepresented in the 66-book anthology called the Bible. But at the same time, I get why if it's overrepresented, you've now given a stronger incentive for people to check out the minute life gets difficult, the minute they encounter challenge. And then you don't have an ability to build those stronger virtues and, again, take those sort of power of life and death in your own hands. So again, you need to have somebody say, let's see, hypothetically, somebody brings up, well, I just have a problem with the Bible and the treatment of women in the Old Testament. Before you go after treatment of women in the Old Testament, you can say this. This deals with a base hit. Well, isn't it true that if the Bible God has good reason to give us a revelation of him that's in an avoidable state, but a transmissible state. That means a book. And if somebody, again, I used to have a student that had a problem with, I just have a problem with God giving a revelation in a book. And I'm like, well, everything we think is important is transmitted in a book, generally speaking, just to transmit it between generations and people. It's it's like saying I have a problem with it being digital as well. It's going to get digitized, but it was kind of odd because she was a pretty good student as a skeptic at our private school, and she had a backpack full of books all the time, but had a problem with God using the book transmission technology, the codex, as the original. Some of the early Christians used it, moving from scrolls. But anyway, the idea here is that, okay, before I get to that, isn't it true that if God gives a transcultural, transtemporal communication, it will by definition both affirm at some points and disconfirm at other points, or at least challenge cultural and individual assumptions, because that's the nature of changing culture. And unchanging revelation will do that by definition. And that leads us to number 3 here as we finish up. If the God of the Bible is the true God, then he desires relationship with us. This is the apex distinction between Christianity and all other religious traditions, major religious traditions on the planet. A true love relationship requires the possibility of disagreement and challenge. So if God in his word, if we're assuming his word is a communication with us, albeit a very unique communication with us, and we don't allow God to ever challenge, disrupt, or disagree with us, like, for example, the possibility of him having a different perspective on women, or on servitude, or on individual identity. If he can never disagree with us, then we don't really have a relationship, if you think about it. If you're in a relationship with somebody and all they will ever do is affirm you, that's not a real relationship. If they don't have the possibility of disagreeing with you. You're not in what we would call a real relationship. There's nobody on the planet that would say, I mean, in the most basic form of the term, they're still relating to you. But again, God needs to have the right to mess with you, right? Mess with your view of women, mess with your view of identity, mess with your view of servitude. He has a right to do that if he is God, and he's giving you a transtemporal, right, communication, a transcultural communication. And on top of all that, you're limited and finite and fallen. So again, these are good preliminaries before you get to the specifics and try to slice and dice. They're not good if you're trying to do a quick interaction with somebody, but they're pretty decent when it comes to just addressing the beginning of the challenge and starting a conversation with questions. So the key here, when it comes to the Bible and problems, we cede God the right to challenge and correct us, even though we dislike it. In other words, you don't automatically assume you must be right and the Bible must be wrong and God must not have authored it or is wrong on this. This is what's behind modern contemporary hubris, is behind every sin, pride, but it's also behind most Bible challenges, which is a thin veneer over saying, I'm going to be a God unto myself and do what I want to do. So again, we start with the idea that you're not handling the text properly anyway. If you're looking for a route out or a clause to God being God in your life and the Bible having an authority as his expression of who he is, and there's good reason to think this is a culturally bound, linguistically bound, cross-cultural, transtemporal expression of truth of God to human beings in our context, well then, again, these are some of the preliminaries you need to think about. There's a way to handle the word beyond just finding a loophole or finding a way to challenge that Bible so that you don't have to live by it anymore. So again, the key here is to understand that it's, again, the Bible has the right to correct us. Now, I'm going to finish this session by talking a little bit about an episode I saw years ago by a very famous, an extremely famous show on NBC called The West Wing. This was a liberal's dream, where Martin Sheen played the President of the United States, a Democratic President of the United States, who was written to be this extraordinarily brilliant, erudite president, no nonsense, but a relatable intellectual with a staff of stellar, diverse, gender and race diverse staff that had to roll their eyes at these conservatives all the time, and these ridiculous people that constantly got in their way. And if we could just get these people to think a little bit, the massive unwashed hoi polloi, as Tom Sowell calls us, the people born to be led by the anointed, that know better, what's better for us than anyone else. So in this episode, the president, played by Martin Sheen, is President Bartlett. He is giving a talk one night, a kind of impromptu talk in one part of the White House. And Bartlett is put off a little bit in his speech to the people sitting there, his staff and well-wishers and people that got an audience. And one of the people in the audience did not rise when he comes in the room and was not standing like everyone else was. She stayed seated, and she was in a pro-life advocate, an anti-abortion proponent that had been asking for months and months for an audience with the president. And when he addresses her, he first goes after her credentials. You're a doctor of what? What are you, a clinician? Are you? So he first said she had an earned doctorate, at least in the humanities. So he went after that. Just kind of odd for a president that might have a political science major or a politics major or ethics law major. Anyway, then he proceeded to tell her what her, basically ask her what her issue was. Not that she was seated, but just what her issue was. And she quoted Bible verses at him about the not killing and murdering the unborn. And after which he went on a long monologue, written monologue, which again, Martin Sheen was not, most actors aren't that bright. I think the only other example of an actor who's not very bright either, but plays a bright person really well would be Robert Downey Jr., a 7-time recipient of rehab. I think only a high school education, but plays brilliant really well. Snarky Tony Stark, Sherlock Holmes, this sort of thing. Martin Sheen as well, extraordinarily as far as academically bright, not very bright at all as a general human being, but as a thespian, can remember the lines pretty well. But anyway, he goes on this long challenge of her. And again, it's a long version of the consistency argument, written by a team of writers. Martin Short, that's one of my favorite comedians. Martin Sheen performs quite admirably, and basically tells her she doesn't stay consistent with the rest of the Bible. Should he sell his daughter to the highest bidder? Should the Washington Redskins be killed for not handling a pigskin, technically? Should people that are working on the Sabbath be killed on his staff? Should there be someone killed for mixing fabrics or mixing? Should they adjust their garden at home because of some of these Levitical commands? And he quotes chapter and verse as well. And just one more comment before we get to some of this stuff. This is a skeptic's fever dream. I've been dialoguing with high-end skeptics at university, profs, teaching assistants, and students of all stripes for a long time. And there's no one that treats the Bible the way the character President Bartlett does on West Wing when it was a very, very popular series, with disdain and dismissiveness, and know all these gotcha verses back to back, chapter and verse as he's making the consistency argument. So I wanted to make sure I'm not going to show the video. You can find it actually on YouTube. It's again a favor, but that's absolutely risible that anybody would have this command of the scriptures he treats with disdain and dismisses. So just to be clear, there's plenty of, this is where I want to jump in the TV, kind of like when I'd watch House sometimes, and I'd hear a challenge to theology or the Bible, and then they'd put the skeptic's words eloquently in the mouth of House, the brightest but curmudgeonly doctor there on staff, all sorts of God versus skepticism stuff. They'd even put the scoreboard up for that sort of thing on the whiteboard in the House MD episodes. But anyway, just a couple of things real quick. In that video, again, mixing fabrics, touching and eating pig, and mixing plants do not require a death sentence, even in the Old Testament. So again, this is a skeptical exaggeration based on the fact that not only was President Bartlett, or Martin Sheen's character, trying to show the woman didn't know her stuff, he actually got really upset and made her stand up at the end. But it's also supposed to show that Christians don't tend to know these categories as well. A sedition that was punished up until the 19th century, treason is something going on, has been punishable by severe punishment or death for a long time and in many cultures. So again, to treat it as something, again, picking up sticks on the Sabbath there in the Levitical code as this kind of, massive case of like Dawkins tried to do in the God Delusion of a overstating the case, and why kill somebody for this? Well, again, if it's a theocracy and there's visible evidence of God's will and purpose and desires there with you, and objective, miraculous sustaining of these people after deliverance, and you publicly work on the day dedicated to God that you're supposed to rest on as a community, and that puts you in league with the idolatry of the other nations, and you're a theocracy, then again, sedition is not is punishable by death for sure. And that's what, again, a non-simplistic handling of the text there in Leviticus would tell you, that there's more going on here than someone just picking up light sticks or, the killing of children because of a Sunday violation. So, and there's more going on there with regard to the covenant and covenant applications of the Old Testament. So, again, these are supposed to be gotcha passages. A thing that I've always said she could have said that right there when the president says, "You'll stand when the president comes in the room." That's how we do things in this time frame. She could have said, I would think the president of the United States, something like this would be familiar with the debt. Even these provincial commands to the Hebrews of the period were to our country. The very fact you want me to stand up in this, English common law was based overtly on the biblical commands and what were applicable. And then we brought those over and added and adjusted some of those commands as were needed. But they were the backbone. It'd be all wind and no sail if there's not something to connect it to. You again have Blackwell doing this very thing with English common law, saying there has to be something, that's to it than just men in powdered wigs doling out, like monarchical types of commands and edicts and things like that. So you'd think that a president of the United States would know enough about our history and the history of our legal code, if you happen to be a law major, that, okay, the very fact that you want me to stand and honor you, honor your position, honor this particular and specific form of governance, that's an admixture of the result of looking at other failed governments, the downside, the cost and benefit of certain wins and losses with regard to governing people, and the Bible itself. So, Athens and Greece, or Athens and Jerusalem. You'd think that that a president would know the incredible debt owed to this book. So if you're saying that because we don't pay attention to all those things today or have a significantly different approach to those sort of things, and therefore no one can quote the Bible as an authority, and therefore no one can use the Bible as a life, a moral guidebook or a spiritual guidebook or an existential guidebook, then you don't know much about the history of this country or the history of your position in this very unique American experiment that drew heavily upon the Bible, both in its law code, English common law to American law, as well as the formation and the expression of governance as well. So again, like I said, not to get too specific with it and put too fine a point on it. I actually remember when I saw the episode, I started scribbling down what I would have said or what I would have written into the mouth of the proponent there, the conservative, close-minded, simplistic thinking, a common sense conservative that was there, that was a radio show host. So anyway, all that to say, I hope you've had there's been a good session for you. Again, just remember, pray silently if you can when you're in these scenarios, and ask for the Holy Spirit to bring these things back to your remembrance. We'll get into more of the specifics of the consistency argument next time, but just remember, trying to keep the conversation going and be aware that this is the way I would suggest going to kind of get a base hit when it comes to, not a home run, but a base hit when it comes to conversations with people that are either questioning or attacking the Bible that you happen to have relational cred or relational currency with. And if you don't, how you can keep the conversation going and see if they're willing to have a longer conversation, or they're just trying to find ways to dismiss it and to stick their thumb in the eyes of authorities in their lives, Bible included. So I hope to see you next time.